So good morning and welcome to NRCM's Citizen Action Day. In a typical year, of course, we would be packed into the NRCM office, munching on bagels and sipping coffee and getting ready to walk over to the State House together to speak with our lawmakers. Of course, we can't do that this year in person, so we appreciate you joining us here on Zoom instead. And I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We'll all be vaccinated soon and we'll all be able to get together this spring and summer, hopefully. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. As most of you know, NRCM is Maine's largest environmental organization. We're a nonprofit membership organization, and we protect, restore, and conserve Maine's environment now and for future generations. For more than 60 years, NRCM has been helping to protect the places and the way of life that make Maine such a special place. We harness the power of the law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 members and supporters to accomplish our work. And we have a staff of 28, and our office is just steps away from the State House in Augusta. Before we get started with this morning's program, just a couple of notes about the Zoom platform that we're using this morning. A year into this pandemic, I'm sure we're all Zoom experts, but just a few quick reminders. So this morning's program is being recorded, and tomorrow afternoon, you'll get an email from me with a link to watch the recording, and we hope that you'll share that with friends and family as well. Your video and your audio is enabled today. So be mindful that most NRCM online programs this past year have been in webinar format where your video and audio has been disabled, but today your video and audio is on for a more personal interaction. So please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. You're welcome to keep your video on. Just be mindful that about 80 other people can see you. If you have a question for any of our presenters, please type that question in the chat box, which is on the lower ribbon of your Zoom screen, and we'll have time for questions after our bill briefings this morning and before we get into our breakout rooms. So Abin, if you can go to, oh, nope, keep it right on that agenda slide. Perfect. So this is our agenda for this morning. Soon you're going to hear from NRCM CEO Lisa Pullman, and then you'll hear some key updates from the legislature from Pete Didisheim, NRCM's Advocacy Director. And then we'll do a series of bill briefings on our top legislative priorities. And then we're going to do about 15 minutes of question and answer. And then we're going to jump into some 4 different breakout rooms based on our priorities. When you registered for this event, you indicated which bill you're most interested in learning most about. So I'm going to assign you to that particular breakout room. After our breakout room, we'll come back here into the main session, and we'll learn about how the legislature is working remotely this year and how you can Zoom into public hearings, how you can submit testimony online, and how to deliver testimony effectively using the Zoom platform. And then we'll wrap it up with some action items. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to NRCM CEO Lisa Pullman for some welcoming remarks. Take it away, Lisa.
Thanks, Todd. Ooh. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning for an hour and a half on Zoom. We are delighted to see you as best as we can from this distance. And we are excited to be having some kind of Citizen Action Day this year, and I can assure you there is plenty to learn and understand and know about, and you're going to hear about it this morning. But I hope you're, as Todd said, I hope you're safe. I hope you're getting vaccinated and all of that is happening. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Dittesheim, who I have to note is having his 25th anniversary coming up on April 1st, I believe, for NRCM. And so we are delighted that he's been with us this many years. So take it away, Pete.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody. And so this is what our Citizen Action Day normally looks like, and this is what it looked like last year. As Todd mentioned, this was just right at the beginning of the pandemic, but we still all convened. Next slide. And we got briefings, and then we walked over to the State House. We went up to the State House. Beth took her usual group photo of us with State House on the backdrop. And then we went into the State House as was just mentioned by a couple of folks, the halls were packed. So next slide. And here's some of our board members and others who were in the hallways at the State House. We had dozens and dozens of conversations with lawmakers. This was early in the process and of the pandemic. None of us really were familiar with Zoom. None of us had been on a Zoom call before. Certainly none of us had been involved in a Zoom meeting with a legislator or a Zoom public hearing. And next slide. And this is how we were greeting each other. This is Brownie Carson, of course, the former executive director of Nrcm, and Nick Bennett, our staff scientist and Healthy Waters program director. Next slide. So this is what the House of Representatives looked like when we were up in the gallery a year ago, looking down. And in this image, we've got lawmakers who were clapping for some recognition of some individual that happens usually as part of the festivities of every day at the State House. It's a building that's just a buzz of activity as people are having thousands of conversations in the hallways with their seatmates, and there's a kind of a festive atmosphere that's at the State House. Next slide. This is what the House of Representatives looks like now when they meet. This is in the Civic Center. They've only met 4 or 5 days total since January. And they are meeting today and maybe into tomorrow to ideally pass a budget. It's going to be a pretty contentious series of partisan votes. But my guess is that before the end of the day tomorrow, which is a deadline, they will pass a budget and then they're going to adjourn and then they'll call a special session. But they need to do this by the midnight tomorrow if the budget's going to be effective within 90 days after adjournment, which is necessary to meet the requirement to have a budget adopted by the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1st. Next slide. And this is what the Senate chamber would look like if we weren't in a pandemic. And this is Brownie Carson, who was still a senator last year, standing and speaking to his colleagues. We miss him. He was an excellent senator, serving as the Senate chair of the Environment Natural Resources Committee, and accomplished a lot as a lawmaker. We were fortunate that he decided to run for office, and we wish he would have run for re-election one more time. Next slide. And this is what the Senate looks like today when they convene at the Civic Center, appropriately socially distanced with masks on. And it's a much more subdued process. Next slide. And this is how the public hearings are held. In this image, the top image, Nick Bennett is testifying at a committee hearing last week, and you can see him with the green square around him. And down below is Becca Ferguson, our current intern, who also testified on a bill last week dealing with the Bureau of Parks and Lands illegal lease with the CMP, for the controversial CMP corridor project. Next slide. And all of the activities that are happening at the State House no longer can be witnessed in person. They are viewed through the state legislature's YouTube channels live, or you can go into any of the committee YouTube channels and listen to pre-record, to the recordings of previous hearings, which is just a complete transformation of how we are used to doing our work. Next slide. And I just want to mention, so these are so instead of the State House on the left, we have the Civic Center on the right. And but despite all of this, a remarkable amount of work is being done. There's 1,600 bills that have been introduced. More than 1,300 have been printed. We're following 300 of them. A number of bad bills already have been defeated. Bills that would have repealed the state's plastic bag ban have been defeated. We expect a bill that would have put an arbitrary cap on public lands in the state is going to be defeated. There's several bad bills dealing with solar energy that would have repealed or overturned or modified our net energy billing program for solar that we think will all be defeated. And then just about every day, there's hearings that are on bills that matter to us. Sarah Nichols testified yesterday on bills to ban the intentional release of balloons into the environment. David testified on bill dealing with efficiency standards. Tomorrow I'll be testifying at a nomination hearing for Steve Tatko, who used to work for Nrcm and has been nominated by the governor to serve on the Outdoor Heritage Board. And a whole series of bills at the Energy Utilities Committee are slated for Thursday. So work is getting done. It's being done as well as possible, but I really miss the human interaction with you, the human interaction among lawmakers that becomes so important for just achieving progress on some of the more difficult issues. And I worry that in this context where lawmakers are remote, separated, unable to develop relationships, share ideas, learn from each other, that there's just going to be much more of a partisan dynamic for the entire legislative session because people just aren't interacting quite as much. But we're going to do as well as we can, and you're going to hear a number of briefings on top priority bills that are important to us and other conservation organizations. And so why don't I stop here and hand the floor over to Sarah.
Good morning, everybody. I see some nods. You can hear me. Yes, great, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am, as Sarah Nichols, I'm the Nrcm Sustainable Maine Director and resident trash talker. I work on all of the waste-related bills for us at the state and local level. And I'm really excited to talk to you about our ongoing initiative to reform recycling in Maine. By passing, an extended producer responsibility for packaging law, which we call EPR for packaging. What this does is create a more equitable, sustainable, and effective waste management system that shifts the cost of recycling away from taxpayers and to the big corporations that are creating the packaging waste. You can go to the next slide, Evan. Oh, that wasn't the next slide, but that's okay. So right now we are making more trash than we recycle, and the amount of trash we're making is going up. Our state has had a goal to recycle, there we go, 50% of our waste since 1989, but we've never reached that goal. In fact, we're going backwards, and our recycling rate is estimated to be at about 36%. And meanwhile, our per capita waste disposal rate is increasing. So it's clear that business as usual, taxpayer funded model of recycling is not working for us, and it's in need of reform. Okay, so you can go to the next one. It should be a, nope, not that one. Anyway, it's a picture of a wave of packaging covering our municipalities. There we go, and our environment. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. So we're targeting packaging with this legislation. Packaging makes up about 40% of the waste stream in Maine, and much of it isn't designed with recycling in mind. I'm sure you guys can all relate. The type of packaging we have is changing all the time without regard for whether or not there's a recycling bin or a market for that material. And by packaging, we mean things that end up in your household trash cans. So this would be cereal boxes and the plastic inside, your Amazon boxes, yogurt tubs, takeout containers, your juice boxes, you name it, the packaging you have at home. And that the stuff that's managed by municipalities, really. And so this surge in trash and packaging materials is leading to more plastic pollution, and it's costing taxpayers a lot of money as cities and towns struggle to deal with the flood of this waste. This is causing unnecessary strain on municipalities who are already struggling, and it's obviously harming our environment. Now, the next slide I have is the recycling is closed sign. But so a big part of this legislation is to save taxpayers money and bring much needed support to the struggling municipalities. So Maine taxpayers currently pay $16 to $17.5 million per year to manage packaging waste. So that's either through recycling or disposal costs. And a recent DEP, Department of Environmental Protection report estimates that it costs cities and towns an average of 60% more to recycle than to dispose of waste. So, this puts towns, this really difficult situation that's not fair, where they have to choose between raising taxes or cutting recycling programs. And it also makes it really, really difficult to have a statewide recycling education program, because programs are different depending on where you live. Some people can recycle certain items, some people can't. This is leaving Maine people who want to do the right thing really confused and frustrated, rightfully so. Okay, now you can do the polluter pays. So to me, extended producer responsibility is just a special type of law that requires the producers of a certain package or product to participate in the end of life cleanup. So really, this is just the polluter pays principle that we're all pretty familiar with. So right now, producers are not doing enough to help communities make recycling more effective. And part of the reason is because they're not the ones responsible for cleaning up the mess created by their businesses, and they don't currently internalize any of those costs. I've been recently liking to use this simple analogy of my kids cleaning up after themselves at home. When my sons got old enough to clean up after themselves, I have them clean up their mess, and lo and behold, there's less mess in the first place because they know they're the ones who have to clean it up. And plus, it's just more fair that they clean up their mess and not leave it for mom to do. So by applying this polluter pays principle to packaging, Maine can bring more relief to our cities and towns and give them the resources they need to improve the long-term effectiveness of recycling. And it also provides the right incentives for the producers to reduce their packaging waste or design it to be recycled, because if they don't, then they're the ones who have to pay to clean it up. Hopefully there's a slide that has examples of producers next. There we go. So just a quick glimpse here. The producers are really just the brand owners. When you look at a package, who owns that material? So it's basically who decides to put that package on that product. They're the one who's on the hook. So we have a great list. There's at least 500 wealthy brand owners that we can all recognize that do business in Maine, that pay for Canada's recycling programs, for instance. So they can certainly pay for those here too. And the next slide I have is a map. So in Maine right now, we actually have 8 EPR laws for other types of problematic waste, including paint, beverage containers, e-waste, and mercury-containing products. And there are dozens of other states with hundreds of other EPR laws. But EPR for packaging has not yet come to the United States, and Maine is one of 11 states pursuing it now. Big corporations already pay for recycling programs all over the world in over 40 countries, 5 provinces in Canada, through these EPR for packaging programs. Some of these programs have been in place for over 30 years. And in these jurisdictions, recycling rates are often double to Maine's. And that's because the producers have a direct economic incentive to produce less wasteful packaging that can be easily and profitably managed by the recycling programs. And because there's a sustainable source of funding for recycling collection and processing and education, those programs exist. So I do have one more quick slide that I'm just going to flash up there, Abin. Because everybody always wants to know, how does this work? And I'm happy to dive into this when we go into our breakout rooms. But basically right now, municipalities raise taxpayer funds to pay for all of the costs of managing recycling programs. And then I think if you click the button, Abin. So what happens with an EPR law is there's a new stewardship organization that's formed, and their role is to collect the fees from the producers and reimburse the municipalities. And there's all kinds of details there, but I'll leave it there for now and look forward to answering questions and having a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. And now we're going to shift to David Costello, who is our Climate and Clean Energy Director. And please tell us all about the weatherization bond.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning to everybody. Let me frame the discussion first by talking about the state's new climate action plan. I think, as many of you know, the state, the governor, had recently formed a climate council as it relates to legislation passed in 2019. The council of 39 members, a broad-based council, working with over 230 working group members, put together a new climate action plan that was finalized last December. Within that plan, they talked about what was most cost effective in terms of the actions that we could undertake and would drive the most benefits, economic as well as greenhouse gas reduction and health benefits. And weatherization was certainly at the top. This bill that I'm talking about now is LD 1094. It's supported by Senator Pouliot, he's principal sponsor. What that would do is provide $20 million in bonding. It's a bond bill to support the weatherization of homes, as well as, and don't move this slide yet, the weatherization of homes as well as municipal buildings and schools. Now, as you look at this slide here, 10 million would go to low and moderate income and senior homes. As I think, as many of you know, those households have the highest energy burdens across the state, and quite frankly, would benefit the most from weatherization and other energy efficiency improvements. And this bond would provide $10 million for those targeted homes to do exactly that. We estimate that over 1,500 homes would benefit. And just to provide a little more context as it relates to the governor's overall plan, they hope to double the weatherization targets by 2030, the number of homes. And of course, this not only reduces greenhouse gas emissions, but saves incredible amounts of money. It's estimated overall that $45 million would be saved by the entire package. That includes these homes, as well as what I'll talk about next. The other $10 million, if you want to move to the next slide, would cover municipal buildings and schools. So again, an incredible benefit here is obviously the savings for the municipalities and the school districts. And again, that target overall in terms of a lifetime savings, so you invest $20 million. And of course, I think as everybody knows, this is a wonderful time to take out bonding. Interest rates are historically low. The state has had difficulty in raising revenue otherwise. And of course, bonds, not only at the state level, but obviously the federal government's taking out quite a bit in terms of bonded funding as well. So it's a very opportune time. And if you look at the state's climate action plan overall, financing is the big challenge. It's an ambitious plan, but without financing and funding, many of the actions that are in the plan, quite frankly, aren't going to be supported and delivered. Next slide, please. And this one focuses on the types of jobs. The biggest jobs driver from a climate action perspective over the last decade and more has been energy efficiency, and weatherization, as I think all of you can imagine, has been one of the biggest components to drive the most jobs. And in this instance, this $20 million bond would support 186 jobs. And as I've said earlier, 45 million in lifetime savings. 33 of that would accrue to municipalities and school districts, for instance. But I'll be able to get into this further as we go on, and I think that pretty much covers it for now. And Lisa, do I turn it back to you or?
Yeah, straight to me. Thanks, David, so much.
Okay, Lisa.
And next up is Melanie Sturm. She's our Forest and Wildlife Director. She's going to also talk about another bond that we're very invested in. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you. Good morning and thanks for being here, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about the Land for Maine's Future, or LMF program, and the need to fund LMF and Maine state parks. There are actually two bond bills related to LMF and state parks this session. The higher level bond is Senator Kathy Breen's one, LD 983, but Representative Patrick Corey of Cumberland County also has one for a lower amount, that's LD 687. Either way, we're in need of new funding for the LMF program, and I'd love to tell you a little bit more about it. Next slide. I know many of you are already familiar with the LMF program because you've visited LMF lands or you attended Citizen Action Day last year, where I told you about the program and the need for funding. It's Maine's most effective and popular land conservation program. Since 1987, it has provided funding for the state to acquire land and conservation easements. And in its over 30 years, it has helped protect over 600,000 acres and over 300 projects. And those span the state. They're in all 16 Maine counties. Unfortunately, the last LMF bond was in 2012, and the program has since run out of money. And there's a real need for land conservation funding at this point in time for a number of reasons, which I'll get into a little bit later. But in essence, LD 983 would provide an $80 million bond over 5 years that would provide $60 million for LMF and $20 million for Maine state parks. Next slide, please. This just gives you a very small snapshot of just how diverse LMF projects are. They range from conservation projects where you can go recreate to working farms. Here you can see someone fishing, so it's not just about land, it's also about water, and also working waterfront. Working forest land is also protected by the program. Wildlife habitat is benefited by LMF. So the program really does have wide-ranging benefits to the whole state. Next slide. Now let's turn to Maine State Parks for a moment. This is entirely separate from LMF, but serves a similar need. Maine State Parks are incredibly popular right now. They hit a record last year. Despite a slow start to the season with the pandemic, they surpassed 3 million visitors. And yet they're operating on a pretty slim budget, which is not sustainable. They have accrued a $50 million maintenance backlog over time. And that's really starting to inhibit the state park's ability to update infrastructure or just maintain roads or add new bathrooms, just very simple things, nothing fancy that needs to be done at Maine State Parks for a number of reasons. One is to just stay competitive with other states. If you go to Vermont or New Hampshire to a state park, it is noticeable, that they have new bathroom facilities or other sorts of things. So if Maine wants to kind of maintain its identity and brand as this outdoor recreation destination, and as a place where you can really immerse in nature, it needs to invest in its current state parks and look to the future towards expanding conservation land as well. And I'll also note that you've probably experienced this as well. State parks are no longer just for camping and wildlife viewing and encounters. They're starting to shift towards a new demographic and new set of interests, such as mountain biking and other sorts of activities, and that requires infrastructure investment. And so if Maine State Parks are interested in kind of shifting their focus, new investment is needed. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, it's a particularly critical time to invest in LMF and state parks. Even though any year is a good year to invest in land conservation, we have this culmination of things this year that makes it incredibly timely. One is that in December, Governor Mills announced her climate action plan, which calls for conserving 30% of Maine land by 2030. And in order to meet that goal, funding is needed, and the LMF program can help get us there. I'll also mention that conservation land is a natural climate solution, in essence. When you protect land, it prevents conversion from happening, from it turning into development, and that natural land stores carbon, definitely more so than converted land does. And also last year in August, the federal government, the president signed the Great American Outdoors Act, which fully and permanently funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that will provide up to $40 million or more for Maine specifically every year for conservation projects. But that requires 50% match for most of its programs. And LMF can provide that matching state and local money in order to tap those federal funds that are newly available. And then finally, I know you all probably have personal experiences from the past year of just how important. Having a place to go, exercise, to be with friends at a safe distance, just how much you used state parks and LMF land, conservation land in general in Maine, maybe more so than usual. Investing in these places is really important. And there's a lot of natural resource-based businesses here in Maine, like the fishing industry, forestry, farming, even the outdoor recreation and tourism industries that rely on public land and access to those lands. And again, LMF and state parks are supportive of those efforts. So I'd be happy to answer more specific questions in the breakout. But for now, thanks for your support of LD 983.
Thanks, Melanie. And now, last but certainly not least, we have Nick Bennett, who is NRCM's longstanding staff scientist. He's now our Healthy Waters Director, and he's going to tell you what's going on with the CMP corridor as it relates to the legislature. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. There are actually quite a few bills in the legislature this session that relate to the CMP corridor. I'm just going to talk to you about two of them, and then I'll mention the referendum. But the two bills I'm going to talk to you about are LD 471 and LD 1075. LD 471 is a bill that would make up for something the Bureau of Parks and Lands didn't do in the past when it looked at leases for the Central Maine Power Corridor. The corridor, as you all know, goes from Western Maine near the border of Canada all the way down to Lewiston and Auburn. And in order to save distance on this, Central Maine Power and the Bureau of Parks and Lands during the LePage administration negotiated an illegal lease behind closed doors in 2014 that was very favorable to CMP. And then they renegotiated that illegal lease in 2015. And then under the Mills administration, they renegotiated that illegal lease again in 2020. And what makes this lease illegal is that the Maine Constitution says that if you're going to have a significant impact on public lands, and again, this, in order to save distance, the corridor would cross through this leased land across two public lands in Maine. If you're going to have something that will harmfully impact public lands, you need a 2/3 vote of the legislature to get there. And not only did the three leases that CMP has negotiated with the Bureau of Parks and Lands not have a 2/3 vote of the legislature, they didn't even tell the legislature. There was no public notice, there was nothing. And the legislature's been quite upset about that. It was recently determined in a court case that the Bureau of Parks and Lands did in fact violate Maine law when it negotiated these leases with CMP without seeking legislative approval. We should know more about what the remedy for that illegal action from the court will be. In the next couple of weeks, we have a filing. We are a plaintiff in a case, in this case in which the BPL lease was found to be illegal. And we have a filing due at the end of the week. And we should know more within the next couple of weeks how the judge plans to proceed. But in the meantime, the legislature took up LD 471. And what that bill would say is that we determined, the legislature in advance, that projects like the CMP corridor are in fact a significant impact on public lands. And therefore, if you're going to have leases for projects like this, you need a 2/3 vote of the legislature. And that would have cleared up any conclusion. It would have prevented both the LePage and Mills administrations from being able to negotiate these leases with CMP out of the public eye, behind closed doors. And it would have involved a much more robust public process about whether or not putting a power line like this across our our public lands is a beneficial action for Maine. There's another bill related to public lands in the CMP corridor that's supposed to be heard on Thursday at the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. As you heard from Pete, there's a lot of contentious stuff going on in the legislature right now concerning the budget. But this bill, LD 1075, it would require the Bureau of Parks and Lands to make rules for projects that go across public lands and set criteria for what exactly determines a significant impact as defined by the Maine Constitution. Those kinds of criteria and rules are sorely lacking. The constitutional amendment that requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature in order for a lease of public lands or sale of public lands passed in 1993. And the Bureau of Parks and Lands, therefore, has had about close to 30 years to get its act together to make rules on implementing this, and they haven't. And they clearly need a push, and that's what LD 1075 would do. So we will support that bill if it goes to hearing on Thursday, or if it goes to hearing later after the legislature comes back in for special session. So I'll stop there. Lisa, do I hand things back to you?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, so much. So we're getting close to 9:45 and we're going to switch into small groups at that point, but there's one good question and I'm going to pitch it to Pete, which is, has the ability to attend hearings via Zoom rather than take the time and get to Augusta and everything had any positive effect in terms of participation in the legislature? So Pete, why don't you take that?
Sure. So because of Zoom, people can register to testify and not leave their home and just go to their computer and testify and then carry on. Just as an example, Liz Caruso testified on a bill a couple of weeks ago, LD 194, to close a loophole in Maine ethics law that Hydro-Quebec is exploiting, and they've spent $10 million to try to influence Maine voter opinion about the CMP corridor. And she lives in Caratunk. She is the first selectman of Caratunk. And normally she would have driven more than 2 hours to Augusta to be there at least half an hour before she would deliver 3 minutes of testimony and hang out for a little while and then get back in her car and drive 2.5 hours back. And she would have to take pretty much the whole day off. But instead, she could log on 10 minutes before her testimony, deliver 3 minutes, watch the hearing if she wants, or watch it another time in a recorded fashion. So I've watched lots of examples like this of people all over the state. So in some ways, the Zoom technology, which probably will be carried forward in some fashion, I don't know if they've really thought through how to do this, has democratized the hearing process and enabled people to incorporate it into their lives without the level of disruption that normally comes with planning to drive to Augusta. The same is true with legislators. I mean, they're all Zooming in, and instead of driving back and forth to Augusta from all corners of the state every day or for 3 days at a time, they're able to log into their hearings from home and then log out and carry on with their business.
So I think, from what I'm hearing in terms of the scuttlebutt for advocates in general, though, it's tough not to be able to go over there and advocate because you need so much for relationships and relationship building. And so that's the struggle.
Yeah, and that's true for lawmakers too. I've heard
Mhm.
many lawmakers say that they really miss just interacting with each other, with legislative staff, with the public, with the lobbyists that they learn from. They would normally have maybe 50 conversations in the course of a day with key people that are players in the process. And today they're lucky to have just, a couple outside of just a public hearing.
So there's another question. I'm going to pitch this to Melanie. What is the status of the ban on aerial spraying of pesticides? Do you know?
Yes, you're referring to LD 125. It had a public hearing and a work session already. And normally during the work session, the committee, it's before the Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry Committee would vote on the bill. But they, after 3 hours of the work session, the committee decided they still hadn't heard enough from experts. They hadn't gathered enough information to vote. So they have to schedule another work session, which I don't believe is on the calendar yet.
Thanks. The next question I'm going to pitch to David because he's a seasoned advocate and been hanging around government working for a long time. So how much bonding is too much? Does someone keep track of that? What would you say about that, David?
Well, states often have, am I muted or? Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
no, you're
Yeah,
good.
okay. States often have a cap on how much they can bond, how much debt they can take on. But because interest rates have been so low, and I'm not sure what Maine's cap is, if it has a cap, but states are very mindful of whether or not they're taking on too much debt. But because interest rates are so low, historically low, states have been more aggressive over the past few years, certainly since the 2008 financial crisis, to take on more debt, more bonding, and it's proved to be very effective. Unfortunately, in Maine, we've gotten to the point where we're taking out bonds regularly to fund transportation, for instance. I mean, we've got to do a much better job of finding a much more sustainable stream of funding for transportation outside of bonding. But again, because capital costs are so low, it's a very effective and politically, quite frankly, expedient way to get away from, raising additional revenue. And in other states, it's used, quite frankly, more readily and more aggressively. Maine's fairly conservative.
Right, and I happen to know that Maine's bond rating is usually quite high, and so that's the other thing that states
Yeah,
are
Lisa,
paying attention to.
that's a very good point, because the higher, obviously, your rating, the lower you pay. The lower interest, the lower fees associated with any bonds that you take out. So that's very good.
All right, now the last question I'm going to pitch to Nick. So does the CMP project not offset existing power generation, even if no new renewable sources are created? So that is the question. And what do you have to say about that?
Well, so I think I understand the question. The overall answer to that question is no, and it's a little bit complicated. So the CMP corridor will offset natural gas generation in New England. This is energy that would be coming into New England, and it would likely push down natural gas use in New England. The problem is, where is that energy coming from? Hydro-Quebec is building no new generation to supply New England with this new electricity. And that means they have to pull electricity from customers they're selling to now. And those customers include states like New York. It includes the Midwest. The Midwest is extremely dependent on coal still, and New York is extremely dependent on natural gas. So those jurisdictions that Hydro-Quebec also sells to stand to lose a lot of electricity very quickly. And the only way they're going to be able to make up for that lost electricity quickly is by ramping up coal and natural gas use. So the answer to the question is that while new energy coming from Hydro-Quebec is new to New England, and it will have an impact on natural gas generation in New England, it will have the opposite impact on natural gas and coal generation in the other jurisdictions that Hydro-Quebec sells to. And thus, there will either be no net decrease in carbon emissions, or there will actually be an increase in carbon emissions as you get coal taking over for Quebec's hydroelectricity, particularly in the Midwest.
Thanks, Nick. And now I'm going to pitch it to Todd to break us into small groups. Go ahead, Todd.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So we're about to jump into our breakout rooms. Again, when you registered for this this morning's program, you indicated which bill you're most interested in learning most about. So I've assigned you to that breakout room based on your response on the registration form. But if you've heard something today and you'd prefer to join a different breakout room, once you get to your breakout room, you can actually choose to come back to the main session. Tell me if you'd like to join a different one, and I can put you in the breakout room that you prefer. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes in our breakout rooms, then we're going to come back to the main session, and then we'll hear from Kristen Jackson, Nrcm's Digital Outreach Coordinator, about how to participate in the legislature this year through Zoom, how to submit testimony using the online portal, and how to sign up for a public hearing. And then I'll share some tips on writing and delivering effective testimony through Zoom. So I'm going to send us off to our breakout rooms. Again, if you prefer to join a different breakout room, come back to this main session and I'll put you in the one that you'd prefer. So I'm gonna go right ahead to our breakout rooms and we'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. All right, so I think that we are all back from our breakout rooms. I hope that you all learned a little bit more about the bills and the bonds that you're most interested in. And we hope that after today's program that you'll reach out to your lawmakers and talk to them about the issue that you're most passionate about, since we can't walk over to the State House this morning and grab them at the State House. So we're gonna spend the next 15 or 20 minutes or so speaking about how you can be engaged in the legislature this year. Again, the legislature is happening virtually. And as Pete alluded to earlier, it's easier than ever to testify if you can navigate the online system. You don't even have to leave your couch to testify. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Jackson, who is Nrcm's Digital Outreach Manager. And Kristen is going to speak about the new online testimony submission portal on the legislature's website and how to sign up for a virtual public hearing, and then what to actually expect at a virtual hearing. So take it away, Kristen.
Thanks, Todd. As he said, Kristen Jackson, I'm Nrcm's Digital Outreach Manager. So I'm going to show you a few different tools that Nrcm has put together first to help you navigate this process. And I'm just going to drop the links in the chat box so you have them to access later. But the first is this Take Action Toolkit, which actually has 2 videos that Todd and I put together to walk you through this process. So one shows the whole process of how to sign up and testify online. And the other video has tips on how to deliver and write effective testimony. It also links to a bunch of other resources like where you can find your Maine legislators, more information on the legislative committees, tips for writing letters to the editor. So if you have questions about how to weigh in this legislative session, this toolkit is a good place to go. And the other tool I'm going to show you is our bill tracking website. So if you want to testify in a bill, the first step is to know when the hearing is actually happening. So a great place to go if it's an environmental bill that Nrcm is tracking is our bill tracking page. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll show you what this looks like. But it's here on our website. I'll put this link in the chat box as well when I'm done. And it shows all of the bills that we're following and where they're at in the legislative session. So you can see if it's been voted out of committee, if it's already held its public hearing, if the bill's been printed but is awaiting a scheduled hearing. And we also link to the bill so that you can find out more information about it, which committee it's been referred to, and see if has been any action on it that we don't have updated yet. So this is a great place to go if you're looking for what is happening with bills that we're following. We also send out emails to our membership if you're on our Action Network, if you're subscribed to our Action Network, for us to let you know when hearings that are happening for very high priority bills and offer a chance for you to weigh in and sign up to testify. So if you're not signed up for our Action Network, although I suppose a lot of you are, I would recommend doing so to be in the loop on those types of bills. And then once a hearing is coming up, whether you want to testify verbally, I was going to say in person, but I mean over Zoom in person, or just submit written testimony, you do that on the legislature's online portal that Todd was talking about. So that's a really easy website to remember, mainelegislature.org/testimony. I'll pop that in the chat box too. And I'm going to walk you through how to use that portal. So I'll share my screen again. So this is what it looks like when you get there. You're first asked to select what type of hearing it is, confirmation hearing or public hearing. Likely on all of the bills that we're weighing in on, there'll be public hearings. So you'll select that and be brought to this next page. Then you have to choose which committee you want to testify in front of, or whichever the bill has been referred to. And so again, you can find that out from Nrcm's bill tracking page. So for example, we'll select Environment and Natural Resources, since that's a committee we testify in front of quite often. Then you'll have to choose the date. You'll see that you can select past dates if you want to just submit written testimony. So for example, we can look at yesterday's and see that there was the hearing to define balloons as litter. And so if you missed that hearing but still wanted to weigh in, you can select that and submit written testimony. But if you're looking to testify verbally, you would look in the future, select which bill it is that you wanted to weigh in on. And then you would select, I would like to present my testimony live, and it will reload for you, where you can choose whether you are for the legislation, against the legislation, and neither for nor against the proposed legislation. So if you just wanted to present verbal testimony, you do not need to submit written testimony. You can move forward here and fill out your information, select that you're not a robot, and then hit submit or register, and you'll be all signed up to testify. If you do want to submit written testimony, you would either type it in this box, or you can upload a file if you have a Word file saved. And then similarly, if you just want to submit written testimony, you just wouldn't check this box, and you would either upload the file or type it in the box before submitting. And then once you've signed up, you get an email from the committee clerk that confirms you've registered and sends you the Zoom registration link for the webinar that will be coming up. You'll fill out the Zoom registration and get the information on how to join the webinar. And then the day of the hearing, you will join the webinar, and you'll first be joining as a participant. So this is probably familiar to you if you've been to one of Nrcm's webinars, but when you join as a participant, you can't see your video and you can't use your audio at that point. When it is your turn to testify, you'll be promoted to a panelist. And at that point, your video and your audio will be enabled. And the committee clerk or the committee chair will call on you to tell you that it's your time to testify. All of these hearings, as we've mentioned before, are also streamed on YouTube. So you're able to go to the Maine Legislature's YouTube channel, and if you want to just watch a hearing to see how it goes before you testify, there's a bunch up there now. And you can also watch either the beginning or the end of the hearing after you're done testifying on the YouTube channel as well. They're streamed live, so you can see them as they're happening. So those are my tips. I think I put the links in. Oh, the one other link I wanted to drop for you all was our bill tracking page. So I'm going to drop that here. And also getting a note that committees do like to receive written testimony from those who are testifying in person so that they can follow along. So if you are signing up to testify in person, while it's not required for you to submit written testimony, it is preferred. So ideally, oops, I think Stephen, you're accidentally screen sharing here.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So Abin's going to pull up his screen here in just a minute with my slides. But tomorrow you'll all receive an email following up on this event from me, and I'll make sure to include all the links that Kristen just shared in that presentation, including a link to this online testimony portal, a link to these videos that Kristen and I put together, sort of walking through this process. So I'll make sure to link to all those resources in the follow-up email tomorrow. So Abin, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and show my slides, I am going to just speak a little bit about how to write and deliver effective testimony virtually this year. And why testimony is important. Each legislative session, the Maine Legislature considers roughly 2,000 bills. and each lawmaker is assigned to 1 or 2 committees, and each committee typically works on 100 bills. So, and these lawmakers are not necessarily experts on the issues that their committee is working on. We have a citizens legislature. They don't have really any staff. They're really just everyday average people. And so they're really not experts on the issues their committee is working on. And that's why it's really critical for Maine lawmakers to hear from Maine people like you and me about the issues that we're passionate about. And sharing your testimony at a public hearing can really help lawmakers better understand the bill that they're considering and why they should vote to support or oppose it. So just a quick show of hands on screen. How many folks have testified at the Maine Legislature before, either in person or virtually this year? Just a quick show of hands who's testified. Great, so several of you, so you're pretty familiar with this process, but just a couple of quick tips on how to write effective testimony to have the biggest impact on lawmakers. There's really no perfect formula for testimony, but here's just a couple of tips. So be mindful that you'll likely only have 3 minutes to deliver your testimony at the public hearing, and those 3 minutes can go by pretty quickly. So we recommend that you write out your testimony and practice speaking it out loud and timing yourself to make sure that you come in under the 3-minute mark. Your written testimony can absolutely be longer than 3 minutes, but you should know in advance which parts of your testimony you plan to read aloud at the hearing. You should always begin your testimony by recognizing the 2 chairs of the committee out of respect, and followed by an introduction of yourself. Identify the bill that you're testifying on and whether you're in support, opposition, or neither for nor against. And you can find out who the committee chairs are on the legislature's website. 3, make your testimony as personal as you can, and tell a story about how the bill affects you or your family or your community. Lawmakers are humans, and humans remember stories better than we remember facts and figures. So try to tell a personal story to connect what the bill is trying to do to your personal life. Lawmakers will remember a story that you share. 4, demonstrate your knowledge about the bill and try to get specific about the bill details. Speak to some of the details in the bills that matter most to you. By speaking to the specifics to the bill, you'll demonstrate to the lawmakers that you're a trusted source of information. 5th, always close your testimony by thanking the committee for the opportunity to provide comments. Reiterate how you'd like the committee to vote, yes or no, and share that you'd be happy to answer any questions, and of course be prepared to answer some questions from the committee. The last tip for writing effective testimony: make sure to proofread your testimony before submitting it. Try to avoid typos and grammatical errors, of course. So once you've written strong testimony, here's just a couple of tips on how to deliver it effectively over Zoom this year. So the first tip is to submit your written testimony to the committee in advance of the hearing using the online testimony portal that Kristen just walked us through. The lawmakers like to read along with folks' testimony as they're delivering it. So make sure to submit your written testimony using the online portal in advance of the hearing so that those lawmakers can follow along. Before you log into the hearing, make sure to find a quiet place with no background noise so that the lawmakers on the committee aren't distracted. Make sure that you're in a comfortable position, be mindful of your posture, try to be upright. Consider standing to deliver your testimony like you would if it were in person. By standing, it projects your voice, and just make sure that your webcam is positioned from your shoulders up. Make sure that you don't have anything distracting in your background. Just be really mindful of your surroundings before you log into a Zoom hearing. Try to log in to the public hearing 5 minutes early to make sure that you have proper lighting on your computer, that your background is free of distractions. You'll probably learn from the committee clerk how the hearing is going to proceed, and you'll be able to hear others testify before you, including the bill sponsor, the co-sponsors, and it'll help you know what to expect when it's your turn to testify. As Kristen mentioned, when it's your turn to testify, the committee clerk will promote you in the webinar from an attendee to a panelist. And at that point, your video and your audio will be enabled. So be mindful that you'll go from nobody being able to see or hear you to everybody being able to see and hear you. The committee clerk will let you know when it's your turn to testify. Of course, before you start your testimony, make sure to take yourself off of mute. Otherwise, nobody will be able to hear you. My last tip is to speak slowly and clearly with enough volume to be heard. Try and maintain eye contact with your webcam. It's always good to try to maintain eye contact with someone you're speaking with, especially at a public hearing. So we're going to replace that with try to keep eye contact with your webcam. You might want to have your testimony that you plan to read pulled up on your computer screen in a Word doc or a PDF. And it's best if you can memorize your testimony, but if you can't do that, have your testimony pulled up on your screen and try to scroll through your testimony to keep the line that you're reading towards the top of your screen rather than sort of looking down. That will help you keep your eye contact up near your webcam. So those are my helpful tips. I hope that that provided some useful information for delivering testimony in this brave new legislature that we're working with this year. So Abin, you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Great. So we're coming up to the end of the program. I really appreciate all of you joining us online for Citizen Action Day this year. A couple of quick action items that we hope that you'll take. So at this point in a typical year, we'd walk together to the State House to speak to our lawmakers, and we can't do that this year. So we're strongly encouraging all of you to reach out to your lawmakers to lobby them on the bills that we spoke about today. Give them a call and urge them to support the LMF bond, the weatherization bond, urge them to support the recycling reform bill and the bills dealing with the CMP corridor. When lawmakers hear from just a couple of constituents, it sort of flags that bill and that issue in their minds. And when it comes time to vote, they'll remember, oh yeah, I heard from 2 or 3 of my constituents about this bill, and it's really important to them. So please give your lawmakers a call this week and set up a time to speak with them, either on the phone or maybe set up a Zoom meeting. That's speaking to your lawmakers is really important, especially this year when they're really not hearing from too many folks being outside of the State House. And we hope that you will report back to us, how your conversations with your lawmakers go. If they indicate that they do support one of the bills or the bonds that we're working on, that would be helpful for us to know, so that we can adjust our lobbying strategy. So definitely try to speak with your lawmakers in the next couple of days about these bills. So that's it. Lisa or Pete, do you have anything else to add before we sign off for the morning?
No, I just want to thank everybody for coming and for being you and for being members of NRCM. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I think I just want to echo that. As I mentioned at the outset, the legislature is in session today. They're in a pretty contentious wrangling about the budget. They are going to be a little bit difficult to reach today and tomorrow. So it's fine to extend your communications to them into next week and the weeks ahead. The bond issues probably won't be voted on for a bit of time. So if you don't reach your legislators this week, next week is probably just as good, and encourage you to do that. And thanks again for any and all level of engagement that you choose into the legislative process. Really helps.
The last thing I'll add is we do have some upcoming webinars coming up in April, which is Earth Month. So happy Earth Month Eve today. We're partnering with the University of New England on a webinar next Thursday, April 7th, which is going to feature Hannah Pingree from the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, or GOPIF for short. And David Costello here from NRCM will be speaking on that webinar as well. During Earth Week, we are working on a webinar with the Telling Room based in Portland to share some youth environmental poetry. So details about that will be coming out in the next couple of days or the next few weeks. And then the last week of April, we're going to put on a webinar about our campaign to remove dams from the Kennebec River between Waterville and Skowhegan. And that's going to be on Monday, April 26th. And you'll get an email invitation to that as well. So definitely keep an eye on your inbox for invitations to those NRCM webinars in the next couple of weeks. Well, thank you all again for joining us this morning. This concludes the event and hope that you enjoy your afternoon. Take care, everybody.